the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Welcome to First Presbyterian Church of Ponca City at-home worship for June 14th. Would you join me in our opening sentences taken from Psalm 100? Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he that made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. As the psalmist has told us, God's love is steadfast, and God's faithfulness endures to all generations. With that assurance, let us confess our sins to God. Holy God, you send us to proclaim the good news of your kingdom to all who are lost, all who are afflicted, all who are captive, all who have been cast out. But we are content to proclaim the inbreaking of your kingdom within familiar communities where we know others will receive this news with nods of agreement. Push us beyond what is comfortable and safe, and strengthen us for lives of compassionate service, that we might be the laborers you call us to be. Amen. Friends, hear the good news. Through Jesus Christ, we are forgiven. Thanks be to God. Amen.
May the peace of the Lord be with you.
Peace of the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Our reading this morning is from Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15. Listen for the word of the Lord. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you might refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" And he said, "There, in the tent." Then one said, "Surely I will return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself and said, "After I've grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah will have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Our gospel reading this morning comes from Matthew chapter 9, beginning with verse 35. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." The gospel of our Lord. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. If you've been out of the house for a mental health drive in the country recently, you've probably seen Harvest is underway right here in Kane County. In our Apostles' Creed, we so often quote the words, "Born of the Virgin Mary, He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. That particular creed skips from Jesus' birth to his trial by Pilate. But what did Jesus do with his days in ministry, those days between his birth and Pilate? We get this interesting brief summary in our gospel reading for today. And actually, almost word for word, we get the same description 2 other places in Matthew. So it was important to the gospel writer for us to hear those words more than once. It begins, Jesus went to all the cities and villages. We know some of the names of those villages. He made Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee his base of operations. He visited his own hometown of Nazareth once. He stayed in the seaside village of Bethsaida, where he healed a blind man. He healed another blind man at Jericho. We have Nain mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, where he raised the son of a widow from the dead. He visited his friends in Bethany often and raised Lazarus from the dead there. He attended a wedding with his mother at Cana. Among the mostly Gentile communities Jesus visited were the Decapolis, a group of 10 cities established by Rome. Other mostly Gentile cities were Tyre and Gessara, where he calmed a troubled man who lived in the graveyard, and then Jesus angered the swine farmers. Jesus traveled to Sychar, where Jesus had an amazing conversation about living water with a Samaritan woman. Matthew sums up Jesus' ministry with an economy of words. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. I want to ask the writer of Matthew why he doubled up on the description of healing every disease and every sickness. Nosos, a common Greek word for being sick, and then malakos, probably where we get the word malady, which we don't use as often these days. Malakos is literally softness, one who's no longer strong. Blindness, leprosy, bleeding disorders, osteoporosis, deafness, paralysis, mental illness, all these are diseases Jesus saw in individuals. He had compassion on each of them. And our New Testament records that Jesus healed them. Jesus was quite busy between his birth and his introduction to Pilate. When he saw the crowds, our scripture says, he had compassion for them. Whatever city he was in, whether the crowd was Jewish or Gentile, he had compassion on them. They were poor, they were hungry, they were looking for any small sign of hope. Matthew says the crowds were harassed and helpless. Literally, in Greek, they were harassed and thrown down to the street, bullied and terrorized by Roman soldiers. You can see that image in your mind's eye right now, can't you? You know how that looks. Maybe you know how it feels to be helpless. Jesus had compassion. That was Jesus' ministry, an encompassing, generous, intensive ministry of compassion. Justice, mercy, and faith, he told the Pharisees in Matthew 23. These are the things to practice. Compassion, justice, mercy, and faith are the things he taught to those very first disciples. And they are the things he's teaching us in, so many ways right now, this very week. Healing of body, mind, and soul for Gentile and Jew alike were important to Jesus. How will we make them important to our ministry? How will we make them available in our community? Justice and mercy were important to Jesus. He told the Pharisees with no hesitation and no fear that those were things God expects us to practice. He continues to tell us these are the things he expects us to practice. Then he looked at his disciples and said, "Ask the Lord of the harvest to send our laborers into his harvest." Interesting, isn't it, the phrase Lord of the harvest? What was Jesus talking about there? Well, I think Jesus knew his Old Testament pretty well, and he was speaking of Leviticus 23:22. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the alien. I am the Lord your God. The Lord who commanded landowners to leave a portion of every harvest as food for the poor and the alien is the Lord of the harvest. The Lord who has always expected his beloved humanity to act like humans and care for one another with compassion and mercy. That's the Lord of the harvest. The Lord of the harvest expects that all of humanity will do that. We know some things about harvest in north central Oklahoma. It's that time of year. The combines are running and the harvest crews are out, and they're bringing in a bumper crop this year. The wheat is beautiful and it's plentiful and it needs to be harvested. It takes many hands at harvest. It takes people to run those complicated machines and people to cook and people to drive and people to receive the harvest at the co-op. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers. I think sometimes we fear that when we ask that of God, when we ask God to send laborers for the harvest, God might call our name and say, you're the one that you've been waiting for. Go get the harvest in. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes God will bring some surprising new people onto the crew. Sometimes someone on the crew figures out a new way to do things. Sometimes things have to change for the harvest to happen in a timely manner. We are on the cusp of change. Some of us will be asked to go into the fields and work. And sometimes God will send surprising new people to help with the harvest, and we must embrace them as well, and their new ideas and their new energy. Everything in our world is changing. God is sending new laborers into our fields. Pray that your heart will be open to the exciting new things God is doing. Pray that we may be bold enough and open enough to embrace change. And may you watch the world through renewed eyes this week and every week. Amen.